Hey, in today's video I'm going to be comparing the Canon 100mm 2.8 USM macro, which is a mouthful, to the Carl Zeiss f2 macro. Now for the past decade I've been shooting with this here, which is the Canon version. It's an extremely affordable lens. I'll pop some links in the description to these. The gold ring USM lineup from Canon is brilliant. However, it does have its drawbacks. Now for me, the build quality is not great. Starting to get a bit of a rattle going on. It's made of plastic, which I know shouldn't matter, and to be honest, it's probably better than metal because it weighs less when you drop it. But there's a few issues with it. There's problems with the highlight control, the color consistency, the way the colors change throughout the apertures. Really minuscule details that for most of us just don't matter. Anyway, I was doing a bit of research and I found this lens and I spent a lot of money buying this. And this here is the Carl Zeiss Macro Planar Milvus f2 100mm macro lens. Two lenses together, completely plastic, completely metal. So much so that even the lens hood is made of metal. And when you buy it, you get the full Apple experience of the beautiful box. Everything's nicely presented and laid out. It comes with everything. And at the price you're paying for it, you'd hope so as well. Since upgrading it, I've not actually tested them side by side because I don't like spending money, and I spent a lot of money on this. So thinking about putting them next to each other and going, was it worth it, has been a bit daunting. But I've gone ahead anyway. We've done a shoot side by side and basically found that there is a difference, but it's very small. And with all camera gear, as you spend more and more money, you just get diminishing returns. The difference between a cheap as cheap can be point and shoot and an entry-level DSLR is massive, but the difference between an entry-level DSLR and the top DSLR is very small. And the difference between each full-frame camera, brand to brand, is almost non-existent. Now there's a lot of numbers out there which you can use to explain how lenses work and what they're good at, what they're bad at, but to be honest, most of it is just completely irrelevant. So what I'm going to look at today is how they perform in a particular scenario, what I like, what I don't like, and also whether I feel like I need to cry because I spent an extra £1,000 and something on a new lens. So this is a good starting point. We've got 5.6 on both of the images. This is a common aperture for me. I'm going to have a look at these images in more detail at the end. But what we're going to do now is go wide open on both, which is f2 and then 2.8. I'll then do 2.8 versus 2.8, and then we're going to stop all the way down to f22 to see how much quality we lose. Because for me, sometimes I have to get depth of field at all costs. Granted, a lot of the time I'll use a tilt shift lens or some sort of cambo actus, but in this instance, we're just going to stop the lens down and see what we get. Now I've only got a 500 watt light out today, so what we're going to need to do is probably bump the exposure up in post. I don't want to go too high on the ISO and lose the image quality that way. Capture One does a great job of bumping ISO without wrecking everything else in the image. So we're going to go to f22 and then we're going to go wide open as well. So let me show you the next few shots. So that's f22 sorted. We're going to go to f2 on the Zeiss and f2.8 on the Canon, and then I'm going to do 2.8 on both just to give a bit more of a, I'd actually think it's a useful comparison, but the comparison I'm sure everyone in the comments will ask for afterwards. Right, so that's all the shots taken. We've done 5.6 on both lenses, f22, which is going to need a bit of an exposure boost. Then I've done f2 on the Zeiss, f2.8 on both just by bumping the ISO from 100 to 200 and keeping the light exactly the same. I'm shooting on a Canon 5DS, so the difference between 100 and 200 ISO for this is negligible. Back in the day, Canon used to be better at 160 ISO. I can't actually find any concrete evidence if that's the case with the newer models. If you know, do let me know in the comments, but I can't see it myself. So that's all the shots taken. I'm going to go make a quick coffee and then we're going to jump into the computer and have a look at what we've got and what the differences are. I'm in Lightroom because even though I like Capture One for some things, Lightroom's just better for others, and for these types of videos, Lightroom does seem to be the better option. So here we go. See if we're going to cry. 5.6 on the Zeiss lens. Now, I'm not a technical nerdy photographer. I don't care about DxO markings or any of that sort of jazz. But there are some things I do care about. Now, I've kept everything dialed in between these two shots. We're just going to look at the green leaves for now. This is the Zeiss lens. I'm going to skip over. I'm starting to cry. The difference is so small. Let's wait for this to render. There we go. It's an incredibly small difference. If we look at the full image from back here, I don't think you'd be able to tell the difference. There are some marginal differences, and you can just about see them. The leaves are almost showing that the Canon struggles a little bit with highlights, but this is minuscule. Now, in some of the work I do, that's incredibly important, but for a lot of us, it doesn't matter. Now, I'd say there's a slight shift in exposure between the two. I think that the Zeiss has a bit more of a vignette going on. Now, you can fix all of these things just a quick click of a button, but I do think it's there. But I also think that the colours are ever so slightly more accurate on the Zeiss than the Canon. Again, this can be fixed, so it's only really worth your while if you've got so much work on that it's time consuming and painful to actually fix these issues. So that's 5.6. I'd say the Zeiss has a slight advantage on the highlights, especially when you look at the plant pot. You can see the Canon's throwing it out a little bit, but generally speaking, either will do fine. Let's zoom in and get some detail, because let's be honest, as soon as we buy a new camera, the first thing we do, or a new lens, is take a shot and zoom into 100%. No client ever does this. This is for us photographers. No one else cares. Apart from retouchers, they really like this. There's plenty of detail in the Zeiss lens here, plenty. I mean, this is on a 50 megapixel sensor as well. This is a raw file straight out. It's been converted to a TIFF for no other reason than I clicked the wrong button. Let's jump over to the Canon. There's plenty. I'd say there's a slight, it's not as detailed. It is ever so slightly less detailed than the Zeiss. I'd say there is more detail in the Zeiss. Now, the focus points are not exactly the same, so we need to scroll across a little bit to get a better picture of this. But I'd say, generally speaking, the Zeiss is more detailed. But this is on a 50 megapixel sensor. If we're going back to the 5D Mark II on a 20 megapixel sensor, or even a 30 megapixel sensor, I'm not sure you'd be able to see the difference here. So there is a difference. So there we go. That is 5.6 on the Zeiss and Canon. The Zeiss has the edge. I don't know if it's worth the money though. Okay, now we're going down to f22 on these two images. I've done the exact same exposure boost on both of them. Let's dive in and have a look. Just wait for this to load. It's a 50 megapixel file, so it's a little bit slow on the go. Now, off the bat, I'd say at this point in the image, the Canon has the upper edge, although the Zeiss is still handling colour and highlights marginally better. Now, it could be my focusing here that's out, but I would say that the Zeiss is considerably less sharp at f22. Yeah, I'm absolutely certain. The Zeiss is not as sharp at f22. The Canon has clearly got the upper hand here. And if we zoom out and look at the image as a whole, I'd say the contrast is slightly nicer on the Zeiss and the aesthetics nicer. The colours are definitely nicer. But if you're looking for pure detail and sharpness, the Zeiss is not the one on this. It's definitely down to the Canon, and I think I found the same using a cheap Canon 50mm prime versus the 1.2, that when you stop it down, the cheaper lens did win. Yeah, I'm convinced. So next up, we've got the wide open shot. First of all, I'm going to do f2 on the Zeiss to 2.8 on the Canon, then we'll compare both 2.8 apertures. Let's dive in. For me, this is where the Zeiss shines. It's at the wider end of the spectrum, 5.6 and wider. And at f2, this lens is beautiful. For portraits, for food, it is as sharp at f2 as I find it at 5.6. So let's dive into this. And you'll see again the colours on the Zeiss, which is now on the left-hand side. It's a little bit more real. I mean, you can't see what I'm seeing, but it's more realistic. And the way it holds in the highlights as well. I'd say the Zeiss here is a clear winner in sharpness, control of highlights, and colours. Definitely winning on the Zeiss. Now let's compare them both at 2.8. Now, for some unknown reason, the Zeiss is letting in far more light at 2.8 than the Canon. Nothing else has changed. I fired a few shots to make sure that it wasn't a misfire of the flash, but this is just the Zeiss lens is letting in a bit more light. I say a bit more light, it's about the third to two-thirds of a stop. But again, the detail in the Zeiss lens is far better than that on the Canon. The highlight control I can't really comment on because it's clearly letting in more light, but the colours are better. And the detail is considerably better. I hope this has been of use to you. So the main difference I can see when you're spending more money is the general rendering of the image. And by this, I mean the aesthetic that it produces. And I think most lenses, their particular aesthetics produced at 5.6 and below. I think once you start going beyond that, you don't really get any difference going on. However, I think the Milvus shines when it comes to controlling highlights, giving great color accuracy, and just generally giving it extremely good detail wider open. Whereas the Canon, for the price, is absolutely brilliant. I shot professionally on this for a decade. I've shot worldwide ad campaigns on this, and nobody's ever said that doesn't quite look right. I think it's let down when it's shot below 4 or 5.6. The colors are not brilliant, but you can correct that with the color right chart. And the highlight control is the biggest thing. I spent a lot of time building very small scrims to try and control highlights. So having this lens saves me probably an hour a day when we're doing big shoots, just in terms of making sure the image looks how I want it to. So there we go. I think for me, the Milvus was a good purchase. It's not that much better than this lens, but if you're working professionally or if you just want a load of dosh that you want to splash on something, you won't be disappointed by this lens. The build quality alone makes you feel like it's going to last the next 10 to 20 years. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, do hit subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.